Hello there, and a very warm welcome to my YouTube this evening. Our journey this evening is going to take us from RAF Bolt Head in June 1944 all the way up to RAF West Malling in Kent. During 1943, 41 Squadron became only one of two squadrons to be flying the Mark XII Spitfire with the Griffon engine. This was an extremely powerful upgrade from the previous Mark IX. And the reason for this journey is that during June 1944, 41 Squadron were based at RAF Bolt Head. Now, they did extensive patrols out of RAF Bolt Head during June, but by this time the threat of the Doodlebugs being thrown over from northern France was becoming a problem. So 41 Squadron were detached and then sent up to RAF West Malling in Kent, because the Mark XII Griffon engine Spitfire that 41 Squadron were flying was one of the few aircraft that was capable of catching the Doodlebugs, which were flying at over 350 miles an hour. 41 Squadron provided air support in the lead up and throughout the D-Day landings. On D-Day itself, 6th of June 1944, 3 pilots were hit by flak over the bridgehead and 1 was killed. On the 19th of June, however, the squadron was pulled off air support for the bridgehead in France, and they were just deployed solely in the destruction of Germany's newest weapon, the V1 flying bomb, at which time they were based at RAF West Malling in Kent. And it was on the 28th of August 1944 that the squadron claimed its last of 53 V1s destroyed during the war. Several pilots succeeded in bringing them down after expending all their ammunition by flying alongside them, and also then placing their own wingtip underneath that of the V1. The wind movement between the both wingtips was sufficient to upset the V1's gyroscope and send it crashing to the ground. The squadron was re-equipped with the Spitfire Mark XIV in September 1944, and during the ensuing 3 months participated in Operation Big Ben against the V2 launch sites, and then they were involved in Operation Market Garden in Arnhem at Nijmegen. And eventually the squadron moved to the continent in early December 1944, making its base at Diest in Belgium. The 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft gun was used extensively against the Doodlebugs in June 1944. The defensive measures against the V1, including massive massed batteries of anti-aircraft guns along the North Downs and the coast of southeast England, and also the use of the RAF fighter aircraft to shoot or tip down the incoming flying bombs before they reached their targets. Anti-aircraft guns were responsible for shooting down over 1,800 V1s. Similar numbers were downed by fighter aircraft, and 200 were destroyed by barrage balloons. In all, over 9,500 Doodlebug missiles were launched from northern France. It was the noise that people remembered most about the Doodlebugs bombs, the distant hum that grew into an eventual booming roar that was followed by a deafening silence, and that was the most terrifying moment, because that marked the imminent arrival of death from above. The distinctive sounds of the German V1 gave it its nickname, Doodlebug or Boz Bomb, and it struck fear into those who stood listening underneath. London was the primary target of the Doodlebug bombs, and the idea was to terrorise British civilians and undermine public morale to such an extent that Britain might capitulate and surrender to Germany, even at that late stage of the war in mid-1944. I'm now reading from a diary that was published by Robert Hunt, who was 6 years old and living in Westway in West London, and this is about a Doodlebug incident at St John's Wood, London. And he tells, in August 1944, I was 6 years old and living in Westway in West London. I was well aware of the sound of the V1 flying bomb, or Doodlebug as it was known, and the effect it could have. It made a put sound before the engine cut out. You then counted 30 seconds for the missile to glide down and explode, hopefully not nearby. My grandmother and two aunts lived in a ground floor flat at Warncliffe Gardens just off St John's Wood, near to Lord's Cricket Ground. On the evening of Monday the 21st of August 1944, a Doodlebug flying parallel to St John's Wood cut out and glided across Lisson Grove and then over the roof of an empty orphanage, exploding directly into the 5-storey Warncliffe Gardens flats where my grandmother and aunts lived. My grandmother and one aunt were killed, together with about another 20 families. They are buried in a mass grave at St Marylebone Cemetery just off the North Circular Road at East Finchley, and a monument with all their names on was provided by the local authority to mark the absolute tragedy. The younger aunt survived, and the following is her account of the terrible event of the night and the aftermath, and this comes from a Miss Madge Hunt. The date of the incident was Monday the 21st of August 1944. My mother, sister and myself had not long had our dinner. We were all sitting in the same room in the ground floor flat of a five-storey building at about 8 o'clock. Our flats had a direct hit from a flying bomb. I ran to the side of the fireplace and my sister followed me, where we heard this terrible screech of the bomb. The next thing I knew, I was pinned from my shoulders to my right arm across my chest. My left arm was free and I could just move that, and I was able to put it out at the side a little way. It seemed a very long time and difficult for me to make a noise, as my mouth seemed to be full of debris. Anyhow, I made as much noise as I could, and I was greatly relieved when finally I felt somebody get hold of my hand. He said he would come back after some time. I could feel that the wall at the back of me was being loosened and I was able to move the top part of my body. I was gradually dug out with men taking turns to release me. There was a doctor giving me attention. We were all in a very small space. I had a drink through a tube and was given injections in my arm. A Mr. Patey was awaiting my arrival, and it was about 4:20 in the morning. I remember having my clothing cut off and a ring being sawn off my finger, and then I remembered no more until I found myself in a bed. I must have looked a terrible sight, as I was black and blue. I must have taken up all the nurse's time with the attention I required. I had penicillin injections every 4 hours, my ears syringed twice a day, and I was given oxygen twice a day and had my mouth washed out regularly on account of ulcers that formed beside various other things. Then there was a place on my left arm that was dressed and stitched, and my right arm was badly crushed. Compound fracture and laceration to the right leg, fracture to the left leg, and lacerations to the left ankle. I went to Stoke Mandeville Hospital near Aylesbury on the 1st of September 1944 by American Red Cross ambulance. There I continued to make progress. I still had penicillin injections for several weeks and also a blood transfusion of 8 pints of blood. The plasters were taken off my legs, these being saturated in blood. I had another one put on the right leg and a piece was cut out so that the wound could be dressed. Before having it stitched, the left leg was put in a splint, and the foot was giving me a lot of trouble where it was lacerated and was causing shooting pains up my leg. Also, my foot seemed to drop. I had a poultice on my left foot, but could not feel the heat from them. And the next trouble I had, a pain in the chest, and every time I breathed it hurt. For this I was poulticed and bound up. I had inhalers from the first day at Stoke Mandeville Hospital. One morning I moved slightly and accidentally spilled boiling water over my crushed arm. Large blisters formed, and I had to have a great deal of attention. Oh, and then I had shock pneumonia. That was a very, very sad account from a young lady that survived an attack by the Doodlebug bombs, whereas many of her relatives and friends and other family members were unfortunately and sadly killed in the attack. One redeeming aspect of the whole incident was how efficient and wonderful were the rescue services and the organisation of the hospital care. Something we as a nation can be proud of. Across the Channel, Hitler's strategy of vengeance was playing itself out. On the 16th of May 1944, he ordered an all-out missile strike on London to begin by mid-June. It was to be a massive attack with 1,000 ground-launched V1s supported by aircraft dropping versions long-range coastal artillery and conventional bomber attacks, all codename Rumpelkammer, junk room. It was another example of Hitler's overinflated grasp of real military situation. And just as the crews from 616 Squadron were taking to the skies, the men of the Flak Regiment were frantically assembling, fueling, launching as many V1s towards London as humanly possible. But early in the morning of Monday the 12th of June 1944, the first V1 flying bombs were launched from sites on the German-occupied European coast. 10 in number on that first day, 6 of which took off as planned and roared off towards the English coast. The other 4 crashed to earth shortly after leaving the launch ramps. 3 of these exploded, causing damage to the launch sites. The other remained on the ramp, failing to take off. This was not a particularly auspicious start for the campaign in which the Germans were putting in a huge amount of planning, time and money. Obst Max Wachel, the commander of Flak Regiment 155 since August 1943, had addressed his men that evening prior to the launches. After months of waiting, the hour has come for us to open fire. Today, your wait and your work will have their reward. Soldiers, Führer and Fatherland look to us. They expect our crusade to be an overwhelming success. As our attack begins, our thoughts linger fondly and faithfully upon our native German soil. It was one of the most unique aerial assaults of the war, and one that exposed Germany's many faults and failures, but also its technological ingenuity. For the Allies, the Gloster Meteor 1 was only a limited triumph, and when most pilots would say was just slightly better than the existing piston engine fighters. I think it is also a worthwhile note that the first RAF jets of the Second World War, which were the Gloster Meteor, and it was on the 2nd of August 1944, and the pilots of 616 Squadron were anxious to test their new secret weapon against Germany's latest aerial assault. Poor weather severely curtailed all operations, and only 4 anti-V1 flying bomb patrols had been attempted. Since the squadron traded its Spitfire Mark VIIs for its new aircraft, the Gloster Meteor jet, they would not have long to wait. Just a day later, on the 3rd of August, Flight Lieutenant Mike Grave spotted his first diver, as the V1 was codenamed. With throttles pushed forward, he quickly closed the gap between himself and the sleek, sinister flying machine. The V1 was oblivious to its pursuer, rushed headlong towards London. Well, the pilot, with his finger firmly on the trigger, Graves, slipped in behind the drone V1 and fired a 2-second burst. His 4 20mm cannons roared to life, spitting out 100 rounds of high explosive, incendiary and semi-armour piercing shells. The flying bomb seemed to shrug off the assault and continued on its path. Graves had fired too soon. From a range of 400 to 500 yards, there was no evidence of any of his shells hitting home, and just as he closed in for a second attack, a P-51 Mustang stole the show. A quick squirt of its .50 caliber shells from the P-51's wing sent the V1 crashing to the ground. It wasn't the most auspicious start, but history had been made nonetheless. The world's first jet versus a jet encounter had taken place. The Mark XIV version of the 1944 Rolls-Royce Griffon 65 developed 2,050 horsepower, giving a top speed of 450 miles an hour, and another quest for more speed. Another 1,000 horsepower would not equate into an additional 100 miles per hour. Piston engines had reached their point of diminishing returns. More power meant more weight for no real increase in speed. It would be the jet engine that would transform the equation with startling results. The next horror to come was the V2 rocket, which followed the V1. The V2 was a completely different type of missile. It came high in the sky, it flew down very fast, and when it exploded, completely without any warning whatsoever. But that's another account for another day. I really hope you enjoyed that short film. It's just a very brief account of the history of the Doodlebug, but please take the greatest care, and I look forward to seeing you on my next film, and I wish you all the very best. Cheers for now.